In this story, you will see how a single man's struggle against hunger, storms, and loneliness gave birth to something far greater than survival. It gave birth to a legend, a nation of hope that still inspires us today. He was lost at sea, his boat destroyed by the raging waves, and when the storm ended, only silence remained. No ship, no rescue, no escape. For 1,583 days, he vanished from the eyes of the world. But on that lonely island, a new journey began, a journey that would test the very limits of the human spirit. And what happened there is a secret that will shock you till the very last moment. Welcome to Historia Unseen. I am John, the voiceover artist for this channel, and today I will tell you the untold tale of a man stranded for 1,583 days on a deserted island. He opened his eyes on the shore, his body shaking, his clothes torn, the salty water stinging his lips. The world around him was nothing but the sound of waves crashing against sharp rocks. His boat was gone, his friends gone. The storm had taken everything. At first, he thought this was the end, a cruel death waiting in the silence of the sea. But then, his heart still beat, his lungs still filled with air, and he realized he was alive, but not safe. The island stood before him like a giant wall, cliffs rising high, covered in thick green jungle. Behind him, the endless ocean stretched to the horizon. He was trapped between water and stone. Days passed in confusion. The sun burned his skin by day, and the cold winds cut through him by night. He searched for food, but found nothing. His stomach twisted with pain, thirst was worse, his throat dry, his lips cracked. He looked at the sea, but the water was poison. Still, he refused to fall. He found coconuts lying under the trees, the shells hard, but inside sweet water and flesh, enough to keep him alive for one more day. Every morning, he marked the rocks with a sharp stone. One mark for one day. He thought maybe someone would come searching, maybe ships would pass, maybe a plane would see him. But days turned to weeks, weeks into months. Loneliness became his enemy. Silence echoed louder than thunder. He began talking to himself, whispering stories, singing songs, anything to hear a voice. He made friends with shadows, with the waves, with the birds that circled overhead. But the island was not kind. Insects bit his skin, snakes hissed in the night. Storms tore down the little shelter he built from palm leaves. Each time he rebuilt it, the ocean laughed and destroyed it again. He tried to make fire, but his hands bled, the wood too wet. Nights were dark, endless. He curled into himself, shivering, waiting for morning. Every sunrise felt like a small victory, a reminder that he was still alive. And yet, inside him, something changed. The fear of death slowly became the hunger to survive. He looked at the island not as a prison, but as a battlefield. Every tree, every stone, every drop of rain could help him live, if he learned how. He began watching the birds, how they dived into the sea to catch fish. He sharpened a stick and tried the same. At first, he failed, but then he caught one. He roasted it on hot stones, and for the first time, he tasted real food again. The days grew into months, and his body hardened. His skin turned dark, his muscles strong. He was no longer the weak man who had washed ashore. He was changing, becoming something new. Each night, he carved more marks into the rock, the wall of his days growing longer. His mind still dreamed of rescue, but his heart began to understand. No one was coming. He was alone, truly alone. But in that loneliness, a new strength was born. From the pain of survival, from the silence of isolation, from the fire of his will, a man was being reborn, not just to live, but to become something greater. And that was the beginning, the birth of a nation of one, a man against the world, a man who refused to be forgotten. For 1,583 days, he fought against death, against fear, against despair. And the story of those days is the story you are about to witness. He woke each morning with the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. The salty wind burned his eyes. The ground beneath him was hard and cold. His body ached as if the ocean had beaten him again and again. The first days were the hardest, not because of storms or snakes, but because of fear. The fear of being forgotten, the fear that no one would ever come. He looked out at the horizon. day after day. Only the same blue ocean staring back. No ship, no sail, nothing but silence. His stomach growled like an angry beast, twisting and turning with pain. He searched the beach for food, but found only broken shells, driftwood, and seaweed that tasted bitter. His throat was dry, every breath hurt. The sun burned his skin by day, and at night, the cold wrapped around him like ice. On the second day, he saw coconuts lying under the tall palms. He hit them against the rocks again and again until the shell cracked open. Inside was water, sweet and fresh. He drank slowly, tears filling his eyes. That single coconut was more precious than gold. But food was still a cruel test. He tried chewing raw leaves, spitting them out in disgust. He chased small crabs on the sand, but they slipped into holes. He picked berries from bushes, but many were bitter and made his stomach hurt. The island was alive, but it was not friendly. It was wild, and it demanded respect. Nights were worse. In the darkness, every sound became a monster. The rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. The hiss of the wind felt like whispers. He curled into himself, clutching a stick as if it was a weapon, waiting for dawn. On the third night, rain poured from the sky. His body shook under the cold water, but he opened his mouth and let the drops fall in. For the first time, he felt thankful for the storm. Nature was cruel, but it also gave him life. He built a small shelter, weak, clumsy, made of palm leaves and branches. The wind tore it apart, but he rebuilt it again and again, each time stronger, each time learning a little more. The days passed slowly. He scratched marks into a rock, one line for each day. At first, he thought help would come in a week, then 2 weeks, then a month. But the ocean remained empty. One day, he spotted a ship far in the distance. His heart raced. His hands shook. He waved. He screamed. He built a fire with dry leaves. But the ship sailed away, never noticing the tiny figure on the island's edge. The pain of that moment cut deeper than hunger. It was the feeling of being invisible, of screaming into a world that refused to hear. Still, he did not give up. He hunted for crabs with sharpened sticks, finally catching one. He cracked the shell, sucking out the meat. It was small, salty, but it was victory, a victory against death. He studied the island carefully. He learned where fresh water dripped from the rocks. He learned where the sun was soft and where the shade was safe. He listened to the birds, the insects, the sea, and the island slowly revealed its secrets. But even as his body grew stronger, his heart remained heavy. He dreamed of home, of voices, of laughter. But when he woke, there was only silence. He began to speak out loud, telling stories to the wind. Sometimes he laughed at his own jokes. Sometimes he cried. His voice was the only proof that he was still human. On the 20th day, he caught his first fish, not with tools, but with his bare hands, scooping it from a shallow tide pool. He cooked it on hot stones, the smell filling the air. For the first time, he ate like a man, not like a ghost. That night, as he lay in his broken shelter, he whispered to himself, "I will survive, even if no one comes. I will survive." But deep inside, he still hoped, still prayed, that one day a ship would pass, that one day someone would see his smoke, his fire, his signals. The first days were a war between despair and hope, even fragile, refused to die. He was no longer just a man lost at sea. He was becoming something else, something stronger. And as the marks on the rock grew, from 10 to 20 to 30, the island began to shape him, preparing him for the long years ahead. The first days were not just survival. They were the beginning of a new life, a life ruled by the ocean, the jungle, and his will to live. The days stretched into weeks, and the weeks began to feel like forever. But something inside him started to change. The fear that once crushed his heart was slowly replaced with determination. He was not ready to die, not yet. The island, once a prison, began to look different in his eyes. It was still wild, still dangerous, but he realized it also had secrets that could keep him alive. Every morning, he walked the same path along the beach, searching for clues. He studied the movement of the waves, the patterns of the birds, the trails of small animals in the sand. Slowly, he began to understand. Nature was teaching him, whispering its rules, testing if he was worthy to stay alive. Food was still the hardest battle, but he refused to starve. He carved a sharp point into a stick, turning it into a spear. The first attempts were failures. The fish darted away too fast. His spear slipped through the water, useless. But he did not stop. Day after day, he tried again, watching carefully, waiting patiently. And then one morning, success. The spear struck true, and he lifted his first real catch from the water. A fish, glistening in the sun, wriggling in his hands. For the first time, he felt a rush of victory. He was not just surviving, he was winning. Fire was another enemy. His hands bled as he rubbed sticks together, sweat dripping from his face, frustration burning inside. But one afternoon, after countless tries, smoke rose from the dry leaves. He blew softly, his breath shaking, and then it happened. A small flame flickered, then grew. The fire crackled to life, warm and alive. It was more than fire. It was hope. With it, he cooked the fish, the smell filling the air, the taste filling his empty stomach. That night, as he sat by the flames, he felt something powerful. For the first time since the storm, he felt human again. He learned the island's rhythm, where the coconuts fell, where the crabs hid, where the rainwater collected in the rocks. He made ropes from vines, tied branches into tools, built a stronger shelter that could resist the wind. Slowly, the island no longer felt like it was killing him. It felt like it was training him. But even in these small victories, loneliness never left. He carved shapes in wood, faces of people he once knew, to keep himself company. At night, he talked to the fire, told it stories of his life before the sea. The silence still pressed on his chest, but now he had weapons against it. One day, while exploring the jungle, he found a strange tree with red fruits. He tasted carefully, bitter but not poisonous. It filled his stomach, and he marked the place so he could return. That discovery was another step toward survival. But the jungle also tested him. A snake struck near his foot, forcing him to leap back in terror. Another time, a wild boar charged through the bushes, nearly killing him. He realized then that every moment was a battle, but he also realized he was not the same helpless man who had washed ashore. His body grew lean, his muscles stronger, his skin darker under the sun, his eyes sharpened, alert to every movement. He walked with confidence now, spear in hand, fire in his heart. The man who had once feared death was becoming a warrior of the island. Still, he counted the days, the rock wall now covered with marks, each line a reminder of time lost and of the strength gained. 30, 40, 50. Each number carved in stone was a promise, the promise that he would not give up. At night, he lay under the stars, staring at the endless sky. He thought of the world beyond the ocean, the world that had forgotten him. But he also thought of a new world he was creating here, a world where he was alone, but alive. The island was no longer just his prison. It was his teacher, his battlefield, his home. He was learning to survive, and survival was changing him into something new. But deep inside, a question still haunted him. How long can I live like this? Because survival was not enough. He needed more. He needed hope. And the island was not finished with him yet. The days turned into months, and the months felt endless. His body had grown stronger. His hands were rough like stone, his eyes sharp like a hunter. But even with fire, food, and water, something inside him began to break. It was not the hunger now, not the thirst, not even the storms that shook his shelter apart. It was the silence. When the sun rose, he was alone. When the waves crashed, no one answered. When the stars shone above, no other eyes looked at them with him. Loneliness was his true enemy, and it was far more dangerous than hunger or snakes. He tried to fight it. He carved faces into coconuts, giving them names, talking to them as if they were friends. He told them stories of his home, his family, his life before the island. He laughed with them. He argued with them, because if he didn't, his mind would collapse into madness. At night, the silence grew heavier. The jungle whispered with strange noises. Sometimes, he thought he heard voices calling his name. Sometimes he thought he saw shadows moving among the trees. But when he ran toward them, there was nothing. Only wind. Only leaves. He began to dream of rescue. not just in his sleep, but while awake. He imagined ships on the horizon. He imagined planes flying above. He imagined footsteps behind him. But each time, it was only a dream. And when the dream faded, the pain grew sharper. To keep track of time, he carved marks on the stone wall. Hundreds of marks. Each one was a reminder. He was still here. But as the wall filled with lines, he realized something terrifying. Every mark was proof not of life, but of being forgotten. One morning, he caught his reflection in a pool of still water. He barely recognized himself. His hair had grown wild, his beard thick, his body thin but hard, his eyes hollow. The man who had once stood proudly on a boat was gone. Now he was a shadow of himself, a ghost wandering a lonely island. He walked the beaches for hours, leaving footprints that the tide erased again and again. No matter how far he walked, the island circled him like a cage. There was no escape, only the cruel reminder that his world had shrunk into sand, trees, and water. Sometimes, he tried to count the days out loud, whispering numbers into the wind. But after a while, the numbers blurred together. Was it 100 days? 200? More? Time had no meaning here. He began to question himself. Why fight to survive? Why keep living if no one was coming? The thought of giving up whispered in his mind like a serpent. But each time the darkness tried to claim him, something inside fought back. He remembered the faces of his family, their voices, their smiles. He remembered promises he had made, dreams he still carried. He told himself again and again, if I die here, I will be forgotten. But if I live, maybe one day the world will know I was here. So he continued. He built stronger shelters, higher fires, bigger traps for animals. He shouted into the wind as if daring the island to break him. Every day was still lonely, but his will became iron. Still, the loneliness twisted his mind. Some days, he would speak to the ocean for hours, asking it questions. Some days, he would cry until his voice was gone. Other days, he would laugh like a madman, dancing around the fire, pretending he was not alone. But at the end of each day, when the stars appeared and silence covered the island like a blanket, he always returned to one truth. He was the only human here. And the weight of that truth crushed his heart again and again. Years began to pass. His marks on the stone wall grew into hundreds, then over 1,000. His body had become strong, his spirit unbroken, but inside, he knew the truth. The island was not just a place anymore. It was a cage. It was a graveyard for his hopes. And it was slowly turning him into someone he no longer recognized. The lonely days carved scars into his soul, scars deeper than hunger, deeper than wounds. And yet he survived them, because even in the silence, even in the emptiness, the small voice inside him whispered, "Do not stop. Do not give up." But how long could he resist? How long before the loneliness swallowed him completely? The island had tested his body. Now it was testing his mind. And this test might be the deadliest of them all. The island had tested his hunger. It had tested his thirst. It had tested his loneliness. But now it began to test his life in ways more brutal than ever before. One night, the sky turned black without warning. The wind screamed through the trees. Waves roared and struck the rocks with fury. A storm unlike any he had seen before was coming. Rain slashed against his skin like knives. His shelter, built with care, was ripped apart in seconds. The roof of leaves flew into the dark sky, and the walls collapsed around him. He tried to hold the structure together with his bare hands, but the storm was merciless. The ocean flooded the beach, pulling everything away. He ran for higher ground, slipping on the wet rocks, his body bruised and bleeding. Lightning tore the sky open, showing him the madness of the storm. Giant waves crashing against the cliffs, the jungle bending under the wind. That night, he thought it was the end. He clung to a tree, the storm trying to tear him away. For hours, he fought against the wind and water. His hands were cut, his arms shaking, but he did not let go. When the storm finally died, he collapsed to the ground half conscious, half dead. Morning came, and he looked around in despair. His fire was gone. His shelter was gone. The little tools he had made gone. Everything was washed away by the ocean's rage. It was as if the island was telling him, start again or die. But he did not give up. He rebuilt, though his body was weak. He made fire again, though his fingers were blistered. Each day was pain, but he refused to bow to the storm. Yet the island was not finished with him. One afternoon, while hunting in the shallow water, he saw shadows moving under the surface. He thought it was fish, but then the water exploded with teeth. A shark lunged at him, the wave nearly pulling him under. He stumbled back, heart racing, as the dark shape circled. His spear shook in his hands. For long minutes, he stood frozen, waiting for death. But the shark turned away, disappearing into the blue depths. He fell to his knees on the sand, shaking, realizing how close he had been to never seeing another sunrise. Another time, while searching in the jungle, a wild boar charged at him from the bushes. Its tusks tore into his leg, throwing him to the ground. He screamed in pain, rolling away as the beast struck again. He stabbed with his spear, again and again, until the boar finally collapsed. Blood covered his hands, his leg burning with agony. He had killed, but he had also nearly been killed. The wound grew infected. Fever burned through his body. He lay in his shelter, shaking, sweat pouring down his face. His mind drifted between life and death. He saw visions of his family, of home, of voices calling him. He thought he would never rise again. But somehow his body fought. Slowly, the fever faded, and he stood once more, weak but alive. As the days turned into years, the struggles only grew harder. His traps broke. His fire went out in the rain. His body grew thinner. And worst of all, hope slipped further away. He began to see ships in the distance again, tiny dots on the horizon. His heart would race, his voice scream into the wind. He would light fires, wave branches, shout until his throat bled. But the ships never turned. They sailed past as if the island did not exist. Each time, it broke him a little more. Each time, he felt invisible, forgotten, cursed. One day, he climbed to the highest cliff, staring at the endless ocean. The thought came uninvited. End it now. Jump, and the suffering ends. The wind howled around him. The waves crashed below. His heart pounded. He stood there for long minutes, shaking between life and death. But in that moment, he remembered the marks on the wall, hundreds of them. He remembered the coconuts, the fire, the fish, the victories he had won. He whispered to himself, "No, not yet. If I give up now, everything I fought for is wasted." He turned away from the edge. The island had nearly broken him, but it failed. He would not give the sea his life. Not yet. The struggles were endless, the dangers unending. But each one carved him deeper, hardened him more. The man who had once washed ashore weak and broken was gone. Now stood a survivor who had looked death in the eyes and lived. But the question haunted him still. How many more struggles would come? And how much longer before his strength ran out? The island had crushed him with storms, had tried to drown him, starve him, and break his mind. Yet he still stood. But after years of endless struggle, something happened, something that gave him a spark of hope he never thought he would feel again. It began on a quiet morning. The sea was calm, the air heavy with silence. He walked along the beach, spear in hand, searching for crabs. His eyes caught something strange near the reef, half buried in the sand. At first, he thought it was driftwood, another piece of the ocean's trash. But as he pulled it free, his heart began to race. It was not wood. It was rusted metal, a piece of an old wreck. His hand shook as he searched the area. More pieces, broken planks, fragments of rope, shattered crates. Something had wrecked here long ago. He tore through the debris like a desperate man. Inside one crate, buried in seaweed and sand, he found shards of broken glass. In another, a bent piece of iron, sharp on one edge. They were old, corroded, but they were tools. Real tools. For the first time since the storm, he held something man-made in his hands. It felt like treasure. With the iron shard, he could cut wood more easily. With the glass, he could scrape fish, carve shapes, sharpen spears. For years, he had fought with nothing but sticks and stones. Now he had weapons. That night, when he lit his fire, he looked at the broken metal shining in the flames. His heart felt something it had not felt in years. Hope. The tools changed everything. He built a stronger shelter with sharper cuts. He made fishing traps from wood, able to catch more than before. He shaped a spear with a sharp point of metal, deadly against fish and beasts alike. He even carved coconut shells into bowls and plates, small comforts that reminded him he was still human. But the greatest gift came when he learned to make fire faster. By striking the iron against a rock, sparks flew. He fed them with dry grass, and fire came to life. No longer did he need hours of rubbing wood. Fire was his, whenever he needed it. With fire, food, and weapons, his life on the island changed. He was no longer living day by day, waiting for death. He was planning, building, preparing. Still, hope is a dangerous thing. It can lift the heart, but it can also break it. One evening, while standing on the cliff, he saw smoke on the horizon. Not a ship, but smoke. It meant fire, and fire meant people. His chest filled with energy. Could it be? Was another human out there? He built his own fire higher than ever before, smoke rising into the sky. He waved branches, shouted with all his strength. His voice cracked against the wind, but the smoke on the horizon faded with the night. By morning, it was gone. Was it a ship too far to see? Another island with people? Or just his imagination? He never knew. The hope had burned brightly and then disappeared. But even disappointment could not erase the fact that he had survived this long, and with the new tools, he could survive longer. He began exploring the island further than ever before. Deep in the jungle, he found fruits he had never seen, bitter but safe to eat. He found birds' nests high in the cliffs, filled with eggs. He learned to set traps for small animals, finally eating more than scraps. And yet loneliness never left him. The marks on the stone wall grew higher and higher. Hundreds of lines, more than 1,000. He sometimes ran his hand across them and whispered, "I am still here, still alive." The tools had given him strength. They had given him hope. But they had also given him something else. Patience. For the first time, he believed it was possible, not just to survive, but to escape. He imagined building a raft, stronger than before. He imagined storing food, preparing for a journey. He was no longer just a prisoner of the island. He was a man waiting, watching, ready for the right moment. Years had already passed. But now, the island was no longer his enemy. It was his training ground, his battlefield, his forge. And in that forge, the survivor had been made. But survival was not the end of his story. Because after 1583 days, the world would finally come looking for him. And when it did, he would be ready. The marks on the stone wall stretched higher than he could reach now. More than 1,000, carved one by one, proof of every day he had fought to stay alive. 1,583 days. The man who had washed ashore broken and weak was long gone. In his place stood someone hardened by storms, sharpened by hunger, and shaped by the silence of a deserted world. He no longer feared the island. He knew its secrets, its dangers, its gifts. The ocean had become his neighbor, the jungle his teacher, the fire his closest friend. But deep inside, one truth remained. This was not his home. It never was. On the morning of the 1,583rd day, the air felt different. The sea was calm, the horizon unusually clear. He stood on the cliff as he had done 1,000 times before. But this time he saw something. A shadow on the horizon. Far away. Too far to believe. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, his heart racing. The shadow grew larger. A ship. His body trembled. For years, he had imagined this sight in his dreams, only to wake up broken. Was this another dream? Or was this real? He ran to the beach, his hand shaking, his breath heavy. He gathered every branch, every dry leaf, every piece of wood he had collected. He piled them high and struck the iron against stone, sparks flying. The fire roared to life, smoke curling into the sky. He fed it more and more, until the smoke turned thick and black, rising like a desperate cry. He screamed until his voice cracked, waving his arms, leaping into the air as if the ocean itself would carry his voice. The ship moved slowly, cutting across the horizon. Would they see him? Or would they pass, like all the others? Minutes felt like hours. His chest burned with fear. His knees shook. His heart pounded against his ribs. Then a change. The ship turned. His eyes filled with tears. He collapsed to his knees, laughter and sobs mixing in his throat. For the first time in 1583 days, the island no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a memory. The ship drew closer, its flag waving in the wind. He saw figures moving on the deck, pointing, shouting. They had seen the smoke. They had seen him. He stumbled into the waves, water rising to his chest. His legs trembled, but he pushed forward, crying out to the men on board. A small boat lowered into the water, rowing toward him. The closer it came, the more his body shook. When the sailors reached him, they pulled him into their boat. His body was thin, his beard wild, his skin scarred by years of sun and storms. But his eyes burned with life. They stared at him in shock, whispering among themselves. He was a man returned from the dead. He looked back at the island one last time. The cliffs, the trees, the marks carved into stone. For years of his life were buried there. For years of pain, fear, hunger, and silence. For years of becoming someone new. The island had tried to kill him again and again, but it had failed. Instead, it had created him. As the boat carried him toward the ship, he whispered under his breath, "You will never forget me." The sailors asked him questions, but he barely heard them. His mind was somewhere else, on the long nights by the fire, on the storms, on the lonely days where he had almost given up, on the marks that told the story of every single day. When he stepped onto the deck, the sailors cheered. To them, he was a miracle. To him, he was something else. He was proof that even when the world forgets you, the human spirit refuses to die. As the island faded into the distance, he closed his eyes. He had survived. He had returned. But he knew the truth. The island would never leave him. Its storms would echo in his dreams. Its silence would whisper in his heart. He had not just been stranded. He had been reborn. And the legend of the man who lived 1,583 days on a deserted island had begun.